A while ago, the head of the United Arab Emirates strongly condemning what's going on. And this just a day after he spoke on the telephone with Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Can, in a parallel universe, the Abraham Accords precede that strengthening of ties between Israel and Gulf states while all this is going on?
I mean, potentially. I mean, I think it's going to be very difficult for the ties to strengthen while this is going on. But one thing that may be possible is to test the hypothesis of whether the Abraham Accords can be really levered towards progress on the Palestinian issue and stabilization. We have over a half century of evidence of anti-normalization, where most of the region did not recognize Israel, did not deal with it. And it's fair to say that it didn't deliver an awful lot of gains for the Palestinians. Now, we have these newly minted accords between these important Gulf states and Israel, and suddenly there's leverage. There's things these countries can or cannot do for Israel to respond to its behavior and its policies, particularly in religiously sensitive places like the Temple Mount. And I'd love to see, kind of interesting entrepreneurial approaches from these Gulf states about how they can leverage that new relationship.
So better to be in than out, is what you're saying.
I mean, my view personally is that engaging is always better, and that the sort of disengagement hasn't really done an awful lot for the Palestinians. But it's yet to be seen what can actually be achieved. I was in Abu Dhabi when Israel announced an unprecedented new wave of settlement construction and legalization of outposts. And people there were genuinely very angry and disappointed. And very soon afterwards, there was a UN Security Council resolution that was presented by the United Arab Emirates as the Arab country on the council. And it showed that they feel that they have to act as the representative in the council. And one thing we would love to see is those countries saying, what can we do to invest in forces in the region that are working for peace, equality and justice? I mean, imagine scaling the work of peace-building organizations, projects that are really shaping Israeli-Palestinian equality and partnership. It would be an interesting thing for those countries to do because it would be hard for Israelis or Palestinians to oppose.
But on the other hand, when you see these unprecedented protests against the judicial overhaul by this very right-wing government in Israel, cynics argue that if push comes to shove, a little war with Gaza will help Netanyahu. Is that the cynical calculation you see?
Yeah, I mean, a cynic could certainly see that rationale. A war with Gaza, there's a rally around the flag effect every time Israel goes to war. I mean, there is an interesting new dynamic in that people are very suspicious of this government's motivations. So it's yet to be seen whether there will be the same usual very high level of support immediately for any war with the Palestinians, because people can see that some of the people making those decisions now have lost a huge amount of trust with the Israeli people. One other worry is the Iranian sort of file and issue. I do worry that Prime Minister Netanyahu always wants to talk about Iran, and there are some very legitimate and serious issues currently, and I think anything he can do to move that to being the topic of conversation internationally and with his new partners in the Gulf, he would be keen to try and achieve. It's why I think he was in London, Rome, Berlin recently, and I think it's why he wants to go to Washington, D.C. as soon as possible too.
One final question, John Lyndon, you're Irish. Next week, 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, a huge success for the island. At the time, they were just coming after the Oslo Accords. Yep. Did you think we'd be stuck like this today?
It's really interesting because it's the 30th anniversary of the Oslo Accords this year too, and you can see next to each other two very different exercises in conflict resolution. One not perfect, but so much more successful than the other. And I think the real lesson to learn from them is deep engagement from the United States and the international community, but also this long-term civil society-centered approach where they invested in scale in these movements that brought Catholics and Protestants together in Northern Ireland. I was there recently and the politics are broken. There hasn't been an executive for a while, but society is so strong. The politicians are pretty unimpressive, largely speaking, but these civil society organizations, these local movements, these cross-community groups, they're the real backbone holding everything together, and what we would give to have something like that in Israel-Palestine. And if we had done things differently 30 years ago, maybe we would, and we wouldn't be having this conversation right now.
Invest in people, not politicians. Many thanks for that, John Lyndon.